Ashok Kumar, who's Associate Professor of Political Economy at Birkbeck. Can you, in a nutshell, explain the feast of problems that Thames Water is facing right now?
Yes. Thanks for having me. Yes. So the bevy of problems that they've had for now years. So the most current one is that we have a 40% increase in spills, and those are conscious and deliberate spills into the waterways, into the waters in this country, and specifically London because of Thames Water. But this is a practice that's done by all of these privatized companies, and they say it's because they're allowed a certain amount on heavy rains, but there's record amounts of spilling of sewage into the seas and rivers in England in 2023 and 2024, precisely because it's cheaper to spill untreated sewage, dump it at record levels instead of treating it. And that's the bottom line. And it's led to a public health emergency. You've seen it around the country, from Devon to, other parts of the country that people have been hospitalized as a result of this. And part of the problem is also that these companies are heavily indebted. They're heavily indebted because since privatization in 1989, over 50 billion pounds of debt has been taken on, and that's been transferred over to shareholders. With Thames Water, for example, nearly 16 billion has been indebted. They've given 8 billion alone in dividends alone. So, and what you mentioned earlier about the CEO pay, their astronomical CEO pay is because they're being rewarded, not because of the fact that they spilled water. They're being rewarded precisely because their fiduciary responsibility, first and foremost, is to their shareholders, not to the public, not to the consumer. And so they're being rewarded because they've spilled that water and saved the company money and saved shareholders money.
Well, the chief executive of Thames Water, Chris Walton, said about that, we need to attract talent to this company. If we don't offer competitive packages, people will not come and work at Thames.
Well, if you look at water in Scotland, which is publicly owned, the CEO there makes about £300,000 and hasn't spilled sewage into the rivers, and consumers get paid 14% less there, and they spend 35% more on infrastructure than English firms. So they've had an excellent record because it's publicly owned. The CEO is running it, and he's making a fraction as much as these CEOs. So if this is the kind of talent you're attracting, like giving them millions, it just doesn't add up.
Well, also, Chris, talking about the sewage, Chris Weston was talking about the infrastructure issues with Thames Water. That's the chief executive of Thames Water, something you were alluding to a second ago. He said that their problems were decades in the making. The infrastructure was designed to operate in the way that it operates. It's going to require decades to fix it and a significant amount of money. And they were blaming this wet spring and summer period. I guess you can't predict what the elements are going to do for you. So I think what I think Chris Weston is saying here is, look, I understand the problems at Thames Water, but this is a long, long road back and you have to bear with us.
That's simply not true. The evidence is overwhelming that it's not the case. If you look at it since 2002, and I think Scott Water is the best example of this, they took it into public hands. They spend 35% of all the money that's given into infrastructure, and they have a built-up infrastructure in that country because it doesn't go to shareholder profits. In England, we give 30% of our bills technically to finance the debts. Those debts are simply they're taken on to pay for shareholder profits. I mean, that's not a controversial statement. That is the truth, and nobody can deny that, right? So this has been a conscious and deliberate attempt to deteriorate the infrastructure because the infrastructure costs money. This is a natural monopoly. There's nothing that incentivizes them to pay for infrastructure instead of shareholder profits, because their entire salary, the millions and millions they get, and golden parachutes that they get once they leave the company, is contingent not about infrastructure, not about the tons of sewage they spill in the water. It's based solely on how much they deliver to shareholders. And they've now shareholders gotten over 50 billion pounds in profits since 1989. We also had 50 billion pounds worth of this is all the privatized companies in England, 50 billion pounds worth of debt. That's not a coincidence, because the debt is taken on and then it's transferred over to shareholders. No. So this argument simply doesn't add up. It doesn't add up.
What I was going to say, I will play devil's advocate, because Thames Water aren't here to kind of come back at some of the things you said. I'm sure they would disagree with some of the points you've made. And I have put forward what Chris Weston's been saying today. If you look at how... Okay, here's a question. How does Thames Water get out of this? How does it turn itself around?
The only way that the Thames Water can get out of this is that it's not a contingent problem. It's a structural problem. It needs to be renationalized. 80% of the public support renationalization. Poll after poll, between 70 and 80%. The most recent polls, it's over 80% YouGov poll. So the public wants it. And it means that this will always be an issue, because the way that they are now trying to get more investment into the private investment to pay off these debts, is because they're like, the only way that we can ensure private investment is if we increase the amount that people have to pay. So what that's telling the investors is that we will get away with getting people to pay more and more. So people want return on their investment. So there's no structural mechanism in which you can actually solve this problem. These are structural problems, and they'll get worse and worse because shareholder profits have to increase year on year. So the only way to get out of this is to renationalize water. It's really that simple. And we have a case study of it, and that's in Scotland.
Ashok, it's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on LBC News. That is Ashok Kumar, Associate Professor of Political Economy at Birkbeck. I just want to read you one more comment from Thames Water's Chief Executive, Chris Weston. He said today, "I completely understand that there are customers out there who struggle with their bills," but he added that the company provides support to about 377,000 customers in the last year. I'm sure